Charles Goodrich. I'm the director of the Spring Creek Project for Ideas, Nature, and the Written Word. Thank you. Thank you. That kind of affirmation is about all that's keeping me going right now. I'm kind of tired, and I really appreciate it. And your energy has been terrific all weekend long. The Spring Creek Project does events like this. We try to bring together people from the sciences and from philosophy and from writing and the arts to create these way more interesting discussions than can happen with any singular discipline by themselves. We try to embrace all communities and the university, and it just is so much more exciting and interesting when we cross those boundaries and bring a lot of different people together. So we're going to wind up this evening with an infusion of the most powerful of all human technologies, stories. And we've asked two of the planet's finest storytellers, Ursula K. Guin and Kim Stanley Robinson, to send us out with some of their work. Their work is profound, playful, and deeply informed. Their honors are prodigious, but you don't need to hear about those. What you need to do is give yourself the satisfaction of immersing yourself in one or many of their novels, like Ursula's Left Hand of Darkness, the Earthsea books, The Lathe of Heaven, on, or Stan's The Mars Trilogy, The Climate Trilogy, 2312, everybody has their favorites. That's the best way to get to know them and their work. I'm not gonna go through their credits. I'm just gonna introduce them with an anecdote and an email. So in 2005, the Spring Creek Project organized a field symposium on Mount St. Helens that to consider what it means to live in a volcanic landscape and to consider the ecological lessons that come from catastrophe and renewal and see if those had cultural significance for us. And we knew of a little booklet that Ursula had written in the red zone that had essays and poems embedded in it, very small printing, but we have our contacts. And she had visited the blast zone on Mount St. Helens a year or maybe 2 years afterwards, just a year after with the artist Hank Pender. And they drove into a blasted and devastated landscape, and it's kind of a harrowing essay and a harrowing encounter. But we knew also that the windows of Ursula's house in Portland face Mount St. Helens, which she refers to as the Lady. And she paid her respects every day by looking out the window and checking the weather on the mountain. So boldly, we asked her if she would join us for 4 days of camping on a rugged bulldozed road high up on Mount St. Helens and join this field symposium. And she said to me on the phone, well, I'm not much for sleeping on the ground these days. And I said, well, how about if we bring you a wall tent and a cot? And she said, okay, I'm in. Well, the person with the cot did not make it to our camp that day. And it rained. It rained hard. And the rain came in Ursula's tent and slopped up her sleeping bag. Did she forgive us? Well, she's here tonight, so we don't ask whether she forgave us. Regarding her many books, I'll just mention that her 2-volume collected stories, The Real and the Unreal, is a finalist for this year's Oregon Book Award, and there are copies out on the table. Yeah, good luck with that. By introduction of Kim Stanley Robinson, I just want to quote from an email that Stan sent me 2 years ago in March of 2011. He wrote, "The front side of our house has a small fenced courtyard." He lives in Davis. Has a small fenced courtyard with a cafe table under a Japanese maple. The trees overhead are mostly enough to keep it in the shade all day, so I've been doing my writing out there. The Mediterranean climate makes it possible. In the rain, I string an 8x12 tarp overhead at a nice tilt and work with a bead curtain of water around me, still almost perfectly dry. In the cold, not often below 0, seldom below even 35, I put on all my snow camping gear. You get cold much faster than when walking or anything active, but it can be done. I have a boombox, so music, it's the greatest. At the end of this week, I'll have sat in the same place outdoors every day for 6 months. The seasons, the birds, the clouds, the trees all changing in their rounds. I've never done anything even remotely like it. It will make it easy to sit myself down to write more novels later. That was for 2312, right? And you've done the next two entirely outdoors. So if you need inspiration, you need to shake yourself up and challenge your limits, try writing a novel outdoors. Stories are, hands down, the greatest vehicle of mass transportation. So hop on board, and please help me welcome Ursula Le Guin and Kim Stanley Robinson.
Thank you, Charles, for that kind introduction, and thanks for having us. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, everybody. It's really a beautiful experience for me. Ursula was one of my teachers, and we've known each other for now almost 40 years, and this is the first time we've ever done an event together. So a real special thing. And yeah. So we have a plan, which is that we're going to bounce it back and forth up here. So I'm going to read for a while, then she's going to read for a while, then I'm going to read for a while. We're going to go back and forth 3 times. So be set for that, and we won't kill you with lengthiness, but we are going to do it that way. So I'm going to start off with the first scene of my novel 2312. The sun is always just about to rise. Mercury rotates so slowly that you can walk fast enough over its rocky surface to stay ahead of the dawn, and so many people do. Many have made this a way of life. They walk roughly westward, staying always ahead of the stupendous day. Some of them hurry from location to location, pausing to look in cracks they earlier inoculated, quickly scraping free any accumulated residues of gold or tungsten or uranium. But most of them are out there to catch glimpses of the sun. Mercury's ancient face is so battered and irregular that the planet's terminator, the zone of the breaking dawn, is a broad mix of black and white, charcoal hollows pricked here and there by brilliant white high points which grow and grow until all the land is as bright as molten glass and the long day begun. This jumbled zone of sun and shadow is often as much as 30 kilometers wide, even though on a level plane, the horizon is only a few kilometers off. But so little of Mercury is level. All the old bangs are still there, and some long cliffs from when the planet first cooled and shrank. In a landscape so rumpled, the light can suddenly jump the eastern horizon and leap west to strike some distant prominence. Everyone walking the land has to attend to this possibility, know when and where the longest sun reaches occur, and where they can run for shade if they happen to be caught out, or if they stay on purpose. Because many of them pause in their walkabouts on certain cliffs and crater rims, at places marked by stupas, cairns, petroglyphs, goldsworthies. The sunwalkers stand by these facing east, waiting. The horizon they watch is black space over black rock. The super-thin neon argon atmosphere created by sunlight smashing rock holds only the faintest pre-dawn glow. But the sunwalkers know the time, and so they wait and watch until a flick of orange fire dolphins over the horizon and their blood leaps inside them. More brief banners follow, flicking up, arcing in loops, breaking off and floating free in the sky. Star, oh star, about to break on them. Already their faceplates have darkened to protect their eyes. The orange banners diverge left and right from the point of first appearance, as if a fire set just over the horizon is spreading north and south. Then a pairing of the actual surface of the sun blinks and stays, spills slowly to the sides. Depending on the filters deployed in one's faceplate, the star's surface can appear as anything from a blue maelstrom to an orange pulsing mass to a simple right circle. The spill to left and right keeps spreading, farther than seems possible, until it is very obvious one stands on a pebble next to a star. Time to turn and run. But by the time some of the sunwalkers manage to jerk themselves free, they are stunned, trip and fall, get up and dash west in a panic like no other. Before that, one last look at sunrise on Mercury. Now the burning tops of the convection cells are revealed in their squiggling thousands, each a thunderhead of fire burning furiously. All these long spicules of flame dance in circular patterns around the little black circles that are sunspots, shifting whirlpools in the storms of burning. Masses of spicules flow together like kelp beds threshed by a tide. There are non-biological explanations for all this convoluted motion, but in fact, it looks alive, more alive than many a living thing. Looking at it in the apocalypse of the mercurial dawn, it's impossible to believe it's not alive. It roars in your ears. It speaks to you. Most of the sunwalkers over time try all the various viewing filters and then make some choices to suit themselves. Particular filters or sequences of filters become forms of worship, rituals, either personal or shared. It's very easy to get lost in these rituals. As the sunwalkers stand on their points and watch, it's not uncommon for devotees to become entranced by something in the sight, some pattern never seen before, something in the pulse and flow that snags the mind. Suddenly, the sizzle of the fire becomes audible, a turbulent, roaring. That's your own blood rushing through your ears. But in those moments, it sounds just like the sun burning. And so, people stay too long. Some have their retinas burned, some are blinded, some are killed outright, betrayed by an overwhelmed spacesuit. Some are cooked in groups of a dozen or more. Do you imagine they must have been fools? Do you think you would never make such a mistake? Don't you be so sure. Really, you have no idea. It's like nothing you've ever seen. You may think you are inured, that nothing outside the mind can really interest you anymore, as sophisticated and knowledgeable as you are, but you would be wrong. You're a creature of the sun. The beauty and terror of it, seen from so close, can empty any mind, thrust anyone into a trance. It's like seeing the face of God, some people say, and it is true that the sun powers all living creatures in the solar system, and in that sense is our God. The sight of it can strike thought clean out of your head, and people seek it out precisely for that reason. Okay. Now, oh yes, you can clap at every moment. Yes. It's like opera, and when you clap, I'll just have to go back to the beginning and start it again. But now I'm going to do something that'll be special for tonight. It's just going to happen tonight just for you guys. I'm going to read some of Ursula's work. So I think that's a cool thing to do. And I'm going to read some of her poems. They're from her most recent collection, Finding My Elegy, which is a kind of selected plus new poems, one of my favorite formats. And so I'll just read a few of them, and then it'll be Ursula's turn to take over. The first one is called The Cactus Wren, and in parentheses it says Joshua Tree National Park. In this great silence, to sit still and listen till I hear the wren is to draw free from wish and will. She flits to perch. Her slender bill spouts a thin jet of music. Then in the great silence she falls still. Wind nods the short-stemmed flowers that fill the sandy wash. She sings again her song, devoid of wish or will. The hummingbird's quick drum and thrill is gone just as I hear it, when in this great silence all holds still. The granite sand, the barren hill, the The dry, vast, rigorous terrain answer no human wish or will. Again, the small, quicksilver trill that has no messages for men. In the great silence, she sings still, of pure need, free from wish or will. That, for me, is the Cactus Wren. It's actually hard because they don't really whistle. They're more like a big hummingbird in their sound, a kind of chittering, almost like squirrels, but tiny. Difficult sound. Here's one called Up the Columbia. Where at the edges and backwaters of the river lie inlets and shallows surrounded by rushes, and over his perfect reflection the heron beats the quiet air with long, slow wings, where red wings claim their dominion over the cattails, and a frog crouches, humble, immobile, watching with golden eyes, there, to that low world of sand and mud and slow, imperceptible currents, of small changes and no change, and endless renewal, my mind returning recovers the sweetness, the refuge of morning. Here's one called In England in the 50s. Over the cities and villages hovering, coal smoke drew curtains, gauze veils of darkness, even in daylight, blackening the windowsills, ledges and cornices, drifting in tiny bituminous particles into the lungs. Still the remembered scent of those hearth fires haunts me, rich with nostalgia. Resinous fragrance of forests unthinkably ancient. Incense shrunk to a black rock, buried and deep, hidden deep for eons. Dug out with heart-killing labor, laid on a hearthstone, lighted. Myrrh on an ignorant altar, arson of centuries. Forest after forest unclosed in all its complex, sweet darkness, curled up into the wind, and was gone where the wind went. Here's one called Rodmell. When we walked in the garden of love, lovers were walking there, alone, in couples, in threes, under the apple trees, in the uncertain air. Nobody was there but lovers, silently seeking what they wanted, the river where she set down her burden, near the garden he planted. Wind washes over the long light downs. By her house walked those who love her. She became the river and was burned to ashes, and there is no earth above her. That's Virginia Woolf, and their place at Rodmell Monk's House is now a national trust and a place that you can visit, a very beautiful place to visit, especially for happily married people. And I'll finish my first section here with a poem of Ursula's called Peak. It's kind of a dialogue. How long to climb the mountain? 40 years. The native guides are dark, small, brave, evasive. They cannot be bribed. Would you advise the north face? All the faces frown, so choose. The travelers describe their traveling, not yours. Footholds don't last in ice. Reed rocks, and their word endures. And at the top, you stop. They say that you can see the town. I don't know. You look down. It's strange not to be looking up. Hard to be sure just what it is you're seeing. Some say the town. Others perceive a farther range. The guides turn back. Shoulder your pack. Put on your coat. From here on, down no track, no goal, no way, no ways. In the immense downward of the evening, there may be far within the golden haze a motion or a glittering. Waves, towers, heights, remote, remote. The language of the rocks has changed. I knew once what it meant. How long is the descent?
Maybe I'll just make Stan do all the reading. Okay, I won't. Well, this is a university, and I felt that we should have some academic seriousness today. You people have been having a fair out there. So I'm going to read you from my story, The Author of the Acacia Seeds. I'll read you the editorial by the president of the Thoreau Linguistics Association. What is language? This question, central to the science of Thoreau linguistics, has been answered heuristically by the very existence of the science. Language is communication. That is the axiom on which all our theory and research rest, from which all our discoveries derive, and the success of the discoveries testifies to the validity of the axiom. But to the related yet not identical question, what is art, we have not yet given a satisfactory answer. Tolstoy, in the book whose title is that question, answered it firmly and clearly. Art, too, is communication. This answer has been accepted without examination by Thoreau linguistics. For example, why do Thoreau linguists study only animals? Why? Because plants don't communicate. Plants do not communicate. That is a fact. Therefore, plants have no language. Very well, that follows from our basic axiom. Therefore, also, plants have no art. But stay. That does not follow from the basic axiom, but only from the unexamined Tolstoyan corollary. What if art is not communicative? What if some art is communicative and some art is not? Ourselves animals, active predators, we look naturally for an active, predatory, communicative art, and when we find it, we recognize it. The development of this power of recognition and the skills of appreciation is a recent and glorious achievement. But I submit that we are only at the beginning of our age of discovery. We have not yet lifted our eyes to the vaster horizons before us. We have not faced the almost terrifying challenge of the plant. If a non-communicative vegetative art exists, we must rethink the very elements of our science and learn a whole new set of techniques. For it is simply not possible to bring the critical and technical skills appropriate to the study of weasel murder mysteries, or batrachian erotica, or the tunnel sagas of the earthworm, to bear on the art of the redwood or the zucchini. This is proved by the failure, a noble failure, of the efforts of Dr. Srivas in Calcutta using time-lapse photography to produce a lexicon of sunflower. His attempt was daring, but doomed to failure, for his approach was kinetic, a method appropriate to the communicative arts of the tortoise, the oyster, and the sloth. He saw the extreme slowness of the kinesis of plants, and only that as the problem to be solved. But the problem is far greater. The art he sought, if it exists, is a non-communicative art, and probably a non-kinetic one. It's possible that time, the essential element, matrix, and measure of all known animal art, doesn't enter into vegetable art at all. The plants may use the meter of eternity. We do not know. All we can guess is that the art of the plant will be entirely different from the art of the animal. And I predict that it exists, and that when it is found, it will prove to be not an action but a reaction, not a communication but a reception. It will be exactly the opposite of the art we know and recognize. It will be the first passive art known to us. Can we in fact know it? Can we ever understand it? It will be immensely difficult, that's clear, but we should not despair. Remember that so late as the mid-20th century, most scientists and many artists didn't believe that dolphin would ever be comprehensible to the human brain or worth comprehending. Let another century pass and we may seem equally laughable. Do you realize, the phytolinguist will say to the aesthetic critic, that they couldn't even read eggplant? And they will smile at our ignorance as they pick up their rucksacks and hike on up to read the newly deciphered lyrics of the lichen on the north face of Pikes Peak. And with them, or after them, may there not come that even bolder adventurer, the first geolinguist, who, ignoring the delicate, transient lyrics of the lichen, will read beneath it the still less communicative, still more passive, wholly atemporal, cold, volcanic poetry of the rocks. Each one a word spoken how long ago by the earth itself, in the immense solitude, the immenser community of space. So, now, we will now move back 30,000 years. So, well, I'll just start. This is the old shaman, Thorn, dying and talking with his pupil, Loon. No, Thorn interrupted at one point in Loon's telling. Don't forget to tell about the woman running away with a bison before the man turns into one himself. If they don't know that, they won't be able to figure out why he does it. And after that, Thorn stopped him once or twice to tell the story himself for a while, in a hoarse voice, short-breathed. Sometimes he asked Loon to start and then seemed to fall asleep, but frowned if Loon stopped. Once, when Loon had stopped in the middle like this, Thorn clutched his hand hard. You're what I had to carry it along. Do you understand? You're what I had to work with. I know. So you have to remember. One morning at dawn, Thorn woke after a hard night in which he'd never once settled comfortably. He looked around at the camp, the hills, then at Loon. I'm getting weaker, I can feel it. That day he rested more easily. He drank as much water as Loon would give him. That afternoon, he looked at Loon and said, you have to remember the story of the 10-year winter. Also the story of Corban getting blown all the way across the Great Salt Sea and then walking back over the ice to the north. And Pippi's story of the man who walked east to find the end of the world. Those are the ones I like best. And then also how summer was pulled out of the other world into this world. And the swan wife, that's one you can really tell. And the bison man. He studied Loon's face. I'll be sorry not to see what happens next, he said. I wish I could stick around a few more years. Yes, Loon said. You have to remember. Take care of the kids. They're the ones who matter. You have to teach them everything I've taught you and everything you've learned on your own. It will only go well if we keep passing it all along. There are no secrets. There's no mystery. We make all that up. In fact, it's all right there in front of us. You have to have enough food to get through the winter and spring. That's what it all comes down to. And you have to live your life, youth. You can help Heather. Be sure to do that. The old witch will need it. She's getting on herself. She won't like it, but she'll need help. You'll have to see to that without her asking. I'll try. Good. Now listen to me now. Bad things don't just grow on one path. They're everywhere. So don't blame yourself when those things happen. Don't let yesterday take up much of today. You've always been good at that. Just keep telling the stories around the fire. That's what needs to be carried on. And from a little bit earlier in Stan's book, Shaman, the old shaman sings in the inside the cave of the paintings, inside Mother Earth. Now we come to you, mother, sister, singing and bringing you some of your people, bison and horses favored by the sun, hunters and hunted, cats and mammoths, every manner of brother and sister, the ones you love, the ones we love. Talk to me, mother. You are the one I listen to. You are the one I want to speak. Not me, but you. You speak to me and through me.
Not me, but you. Wow. Well, I'm going to continue with a passage from a novel of mine. It's the third volume of a larger work called Science in the Capital. And the third volume was published under the title 60 Days and Counting. Tuberculosis progressed in Thoreau until it was clear he was dying. He was 44 and just beginning to become a well-known writer. In the bold, if morbid style of the time, people dropped by to visit him on his deathbed. It became a kind of tourist destination for the New England intelligentsia. Stories were told to illustrate his flinty character. God knows what he thought of it. He played his part. A few weeks before he died, a family friend asked him, quote, how he stood affected towards Christ. Thoreau answered, as reported later in the Christian Examiner, that a snowstorm was more to him than Christ. His Aunt Louisa asked him if he had made his peace with God, and he replied, I did not know we had ever quarreled. Parker Pillsbury, an abolitionist and family friend, dropped by near the inn and said to him, you seem so near the brink of the dark river that I almost wonder how the opposite shore may appear to you. Thoreau said, one world at a time. Then he died, and for Emerson it was yet another in the series of catastrophic premature deaths that had struck his loved ones, wife, child, friend. In reading Emerson's eulogy of Thoreau, Frank could sense the intense care the old man had taken to give a fair and full portrait. In reading Henry Thoreau's journal, I am very sensible of the vigor of his constitution, that oaken strength which I noted whenever he walked or worked or surveyed woodlots. Henry shows in his literary task. He has muscles and ventures on and performs feats which I am forced to decline. In reading him, I find the same thought, the same spirit that is in me, but he takes a step beyond and illustrates by excellent images that which I should have conveyed in a sleepy generality. 'Tis as if I went into a gymnasium and saw youths leap, climb, and swing with a force unapproachable, though their feats are only continuations of my initial grapplings and jumps. Emerson went on, he knew the country like a fox or a bird, and passed through it as freely by paths of his own. His power of observation seemed to indicate additional senses. He saw as with a microscope, heard as with ear trumpet, and his memory was a photographic register of all he saw and heard. He thought that if waked up from a trance in this swamp, he could tell by the plants what time of year it was within 2 days. To him, there was no such thing as size. The pond was a small ocean, the Atlantic a large Walden pond. He referred every minute fact to cosmical laws. In short, a scientist. But Emerson's grief also had an edge to it, a kind of anger at fate which spilled over into frustration even with Thoreau himself. I cannot help counting it a fault in him that he had no ambition. Wanting this, instead of engineering all America, he was the captain of a huckleberry party. Wow, that's pretty harsh, especially for a eulogy. And Frank saw reason to believe that this was not the first time that Emerson had used the phrase, and that the first time it had been said right to Thoreau's face. They had argued a lot, and about things they both thought mattered. And in Thoreau's journal, whenever he was grumbling about the terrible inadequacies of friendship, it was pretty clear he was usually complaining about Emerson. This is particularly true whenever he wrote about capitalized the friend. It made sense, given the way that they were. Emerson had a huge range of acquaintances and spread himself thin, while Thoreau had what Frank thought would now be called social anxieties, so that he relied heavily on a few people close to him. It would not have been easy for any friend to live up to his standards. Emerson said, "I think the severity of his ideal interfered to deprive him of a healthy sufficiency of human society." In any case, they clashed, two strong thinkers with their own ideas, and so they saw less of each other, and Emerson disapproved of Thoreau's withdrawal and his endless botanizing. Only in the privacy of his journal did Thoreau make his rebuttal to Emerson's waspish accusation, and this was why Frank thought that Emerson had made it directly, perhaps even shouted it. He imagined the two men out in Emerson's yard, Thoreau having dropped by without warning, withdrawn and contrary, headed into the woods, and the lonely old gabster, hurt by this and frustrated to see the potential great voice of the age go missing in the swamps. You could be engineering all America, and yet you go off to be captain of a huckleberry party. Thoreau wrote in his journal, "To such a pass our civilization and division of labor has come, that A, a professional huckleberry picker has hired B's field, C, a professed cook is superintending the cooking of a pudding made of the berries, while Professor D, for which the pudding is intended, sits in his library writing a book. That book, which should be the ultimate fruit of the huckleberry field, will be worthless. There will be none of the spirit of the huckleberry in it. The reading of it will be a weariness to the flesh. I believe in a different kind of division of labor, and that Professor D should divide himself between the library and the huckleberry field." And 4 days later, still nursing this riposte, he wrote, "We dwellers in the huckleberry pastures are slow to adopt the notions of large towns and cities, and may perchance be nicknamed huckleberry people." In the end, despite these spats, the two men were friends. They both knew that a twist of fate had thrown them into the same time and place together, and they both treasured the contact. Thoreau wrote of his employer, teacher, mentor, friend, "Emerson has special talents unequaled. The divine in man has had no more easy, methodically distinct expression. His personal influence upon young persons greater than any man's. In his world, every man would be a poet, love would reign, beauty would take place, man and nature would harmonize." It's interesting how even here Thoreau alluded to that source of conflict between them, the question of how to make an impact on the time. Meanwhile, Emerson thought Thoreau had disappeared into the woods and failed to live up to his promise. He could not foresee how widely Thoreau would eventually be read. It took many decades before Thoreau's journals were transcribed, and only then was his full accomplishment revealed, a very rare thing, the transcription of a mind onto the page, so that it was as if the reader became telepathic and could hear someone else thinking at last. And what thoughts! Of how to be an American, and how to see the land and the animals, and how to live up to the new world and become native to this place. His Walden was a kind of glorious distillate of the journal, and this book grew and grew in the American consciousness, became a living monument and a challenge to each generation in turn. Could America live up to Walden? Could America live up to Emerson? It was still an open question, and every day a new answer came. Frank, reading them in awe, having found the true social biology at last, a reading of the species that could be put to use, that helped one to live, looked around him at all the ferals he lived amongst, at the polyglot conclave of all the peoples of the city, and he watched the animals coming back to the forest, and he thought about how it could be, and he saw that it could happen, that they might learn how to live on this world properly, and all become huckleberry people at last. Emerson, meanwhile, lived on. He carried the burden of grief and love, and his tribute to his young friend ended with the love and not the reproach, as it should be. The scale on which his studies proceeded was so large as to require longevity, and we were the less prepared for his sudden disappearance. The country knows not yet, not in the least part, how great a son it has lost. It seems an injury that he should leave it in the midst of his broken task, which none else can finish. But wherever there is knowledge, wherever there is virtue, wherever there is beauty, he will find a home. So Frank tried to make one of those homes. He read Emerson and Thoreau to learn about himself. He forwarded the link to Emerson for the day in all of his emails and passed on their news. And he posted printouts of various passages for the ferals to enjoy at their potlucks, and he read passages aloud to Eduardo and Anna, and eventually a lot of his friends were also reading and enjoying EmersonForTheDay.com. Diane was a big fan, and she had gotten Phil Chase interested as well. I have to pause here to tell you that Emerson.com, although first mentioned on that very page, is now a site that you can go to and read. Someone put one up. It was quite wonderful. A paragraph from Emerson every day, a different paragraph, and he's like some kind of mad fortune cookie. The more you read Emerson, the weirder he becomes. And in this, I just almost done, but Phil Chase is President of the United States, and the Diane he's talking to is his science advisor whom he has married. And people say that I never write fantasy, but in fact I do. Phil's hunt for America's past and an exemplary figure to give him inspiration and hope was still focused on FDR for obvious reasons, but he was capable of appreciating the New England pair as well, especially when Diane shoved a passage in front of his face at breakfast. It had become a part of their morning routine. One day he read it first, beating her to the punch. By God, he was a radical. Here it is, 1846. He's talking about what comes after they defeat slavery. Listen to this. Every reform is only a mask under cover of which a more terrible reform, which dares not yet name itself, advances. Slavery and anti-slavery is the question of property and no property, rent and anti-rent. And anti-slavery dare not yet say that every man must do his own work. Yet that is at last the upshot. Amazing, Diane said. And now we're here. Phil nodded as he sipped his coffee. Yes, you gotta love it. And Diane looked at him over the tops of her glasses. A middle-aged couple at breakfast, reading their laptops. You've got to do it, she said. Phil grinned. Well, we're trying, dear. We're doing our best. Diane looked at him and said, you go first. You're the one with the bully pulpit. Phil said, oh, of course, I will. I mean, I am kind of a bully, but the truth is, we all have to do it.
Well, this is sort of the dark part of my reading, is this set. I'm going to be reading 7 poems. They're mostly quite recent. A couple of them are published in Finding My Elegy, but the others are pretty new, and so I have not read them before, and this... So you are the guinea pig audience. It's always very scary, I'll tell you. Okay, distance. If we refuse the notion of away, could we relearn the truth of far? We deny distance, busy filling it with what we throw out of the car, paving the house of Shiva with our shit, scumming Poseidon's silver hair with tar, fouling the quail's nest. Away is where we live, and here is where we are, a long distance from the nearest star. Kinship. This one got published in Orion magazine. I hope you know Orion. Very slowly burning, the big forest tree stands in the slight hollow of the snow, melted around it by the mild, long heat of its being and its will to be root, trunk, branch, leaf, and no earth dark, sunlight, wind touch, bird song. Rootless and restless and warm-blooded, we blaze in the flare that blinds us to that slow, tall, fraternal fire of life, as strong now as in the seedling, 2 centuries ago. Whiteness. Meditations for Melville. 1. Whiteness crossed the continent, a poison fog, and where it went, villages were vacant, hearths and ways forsaken. Whiteness with greed and iron makes the deep seas barren. Great migrations fly day long into whiteness and are gone. 2. Whiteness in its righteousness bleaches creatures colorless, tolerates no shadow. 3. People walk unseen, staring at a little screen where the whiteness plays an imitation of their days. Plugged in their ears, white noise drowns an ancient voice, murmuring to bless darkness. The Serrano Indians knew that earthquakes up in high valleys of the Sierra Nevada caused changes in the water level of the pools of the oasis of Mara, which is way down below in the Joshua Tree Desert. And the Indians were aware of that connection. So this poem is called Messages. The waters of these quiet pools are troubled, suddenly sink away into the ground, shrink down to mud, then flood upward, turbid, disturbed. The desert palms all round shiver in the hot, silent air. 100 miles away and hills a mile higher, a valley shudders with subsonic thunder, an impulse of the earth's intrinsic fire, moving through lightless arteries to bear the message of the abyss, the underplaces, to those far ranges shining high in air, and Desert Mara's shadowy oasis. The shadowy springs of thought sink down or flow, obeying impulses as deep and strange from the body's inwardness. And shaken, we know the imminence of mystery and change. It's a hymn to time. Time says, let there be every moment, and instantly there is space and the radiance of each bright galaxy, and eyes beholding radiance, and the gnats' flickering dance, and the sea's expanse, and death and chance. Time makes room for going and coming home, and in time's womb begins all ending. Time is being, and being time, it is all one thing, the shining, the seeing, the dark abounding. Geology of the Northwest Coast. The little towns, the driftwood fires all down the beaches burning. It will be dark in that night when the deep basalt shifts and sighs, headlands collapse, cliffs fail, then the tumult of the sea returning, and silence. The slow drift of stars. We want it to be a sentence on our sin, our greed, our thriftless wars. We claim the fault as warning. But what to them is any act of ours? The new shores at the dark night's end, the beautiful, remorseless morning. Told you, it's going to be dark here. And the last one is a hymn to Aphrodite. This is Venus Aphrodite, as in Lucretius' poem, the the mother, the begetter, the daughter of ocean. And I wanted to bring her away from the Mediterranean and the Atlantic out here. And I'm sorry to say, the first line of this poem is in Latin. My own bad Latin. Venus solis occasus orientisque dea pacifica, foam-born, implacable, tender. War and storm serve you, and you wear the fiery tiara of the volcanoes. The young salmon swimming downriver and the old upstream to breed and die are yours, and the fog-drinking forests. Yours are the scattered emerald half-circles of islands, the lost islands. Yours are the sunken warships of the emperor. Yours is each raindrop of the vast typhoon and the slow swirl of pelagic polymers. The depths below all light are yours. The moon is your hand mirror. Mother of time and daughter of destruction, your feet are light upon the waters. Death, your dog, follows you down the beaches, whining to see the breakers break into blossom, into immortal foam flowers, where you have left the bright track of your passing. Pity your fearful, foolish children, O Aphrodite of Fukushima.
I'm going to end, my last set here, I'm going to read two walking poems, one about 4 minutes, one about 6 minutes. I like walking. I spend a fair amount of time walking, and it's occurred to me as I was preparing for this reading that one of the many reasons that I fell in love with Ursula Guin's work a long time ago is because there's a lot of walking in Ursula's novels, and that attracted me. There's not only the great scene in The Left Hand of Darkness where Estervin and Genlei cross the ice, a truly great scene, an all-timer, but also in the Hainish books that came right before it, there were people that walk across North America after they've forgotten it's North America. And there's another novel in which when they get tired of walking every once in a while, some flying mountain lions will give them a ride. I'd take that. I found that very attractive. So, two walking poems, and I have little to say about them. I think they'll explain themselves, except for the first one's called Tenzing, and I just want to clarify that by that I don't mean Tenzing nor gay, but a man named Tenzing Sherpa. Tenzing is like a name like John. It's a very common name in Nepal. So this poem is called Tenzing. Tenzing did not speak much English. Hungry, food, tired, rest, vomit. Words of power from a power in the land. Tea house to tea house he led us, across lands scored deep, rivers in mountains, no end to them. He arranged our food, he arranged our sleep, he showed us the way. Up the gorge of the Dude Kosi, green leaves, leeches, everything wet, always within the monsoon clouds. One evening they cleared, and there above the peaks, above the clouds, another range above the world. We walked up there. Namche Bazaar perched in space, Tangbochi, Pengbochi, Fariche, up glacier canyons, up their walls, over ice and rock, to Gorak Shep, Dead Crow, the last tea house. Dawn struggle up Kalapatar, sit on the peak, necks craned up to look at Everest. Massive slab, bright in the sky. Sagarmatha, Chomolungma, mother goddess of the world. Tenzing pointed at South Col, fabled last camp, littered with gear, terrible stories, corpses. Tenzing had been there 4 times, portering up and down Khumbu Icefall, the sidewalk over the white abyss, where any moment the world could crash and end it all, a place, in other words, like any other place we stand. Beside Tenzing, we do not yet know the world and the icefall are the same. We see it in his faces, Himalaya, gleaming like ice in the sun. Windy, he said. South cold, very windy. He was 54. Later that morning, Lisa got sick. He led her down by the hand, offering tea, sips of water, and brought us down to Farice, helped run the tea house while Lisa recovered, helped the Sherpani who cooked all day, led us to the ancient monastery, showed us the wall of demon masks, took us to Tangboche in the rain, made sure we saw the monk's mandala, 5 men in red, sitting and laughing over a circle of colored sands, rubbing funnels with sticks to free trickles of red, green, yellow, blue. Intent, then a joke, and we three sitting with them through a dark, rainy day. We sit there still in some inner space. He led us back down into the world, down to Namche, down to Lukla, the little airstrip hacked into the wall of the gorge, an outpost of everything. Led us into the Sherpa co-op at dusk. Everyone in there watching TV, powered by the Honda generator out back. A video of the Live Aid concert. Everyone stunned at the sight of Ozzy Osbourne chewing up the stage. Tenzing, the man who led us, who took care of us, who taught us, finished eating and crossed the room, crouched beside me, gestured at the TV. America, he said. No, I said. No, that's England. So, it can't possibly end on a note that bitter and grim. And the next one, again, I would invite you to go back 30,000 years. Campfire, easy thing to do. Actually, a lot easier to do than you would imagine, but we are very well equipped for it. Our brains are very well equipped for this. Around by the fire, listening to someone tell a story. I am a traveler, as you know. I walk the surface of Mother Earth, and so do my fellow travelers, each of us on his own path. And some of us repeat our paths as long as we can find them, and nothing makes us take a different way. I'm one of those myself, having a wife with my brother, and he goes out when I'm at home, and he doesn't like it when I'm overly late, although both of us have been delayed once or twice through the years. What this means for me is I go out east to the gate between worlds and then turn north and walk for a fortnight, right up to the edge of the great ice cap, and come back just under that great white wall, or sometimes up on the ice itself if the summer melt has made the land next to the ice impassable. West I return and south across the steppes to home, using paths of my own that no one knows, the best ways of all. That's the way it is for me, but in my travels I meet other men out walking the world, and some of them have neither circuit nor home, but wander always a new way. These men are curious people, odd in their ways and speech, but interesting for that, and we talk. Always when travelers get together over a fire, we talk. You can see that right now, I know. And travelers together talk about traveling. Where have you been? What have you seen? What are people like? What's out there in this world we live on? These are the questions we ask and the stories we tell. And some travelers travel to find the answers and tell new stories to those they meet. One such I met this summer at the farthest east of all the places I go. And this man looked like the Northers, and I could barely understand him, but I could, and it got easier as we talked, because he had only one thing to talk about, which was this world we live on, its shape and size. All travelers agree, for we've seen it ourselves, there's ice to the north wherever you go, and to the west is the great salt sea, and to the south again the salt sea, although warmer and more calm, more in and out, and dotted with islands. We all agree on this, we travelers, as between us we've seen it all, and some travelers claim to have seen it all themselves alone. Good, maybe they're even telling the truth, I can't say. But here's the thing, what about east? This northern man was like a lot of us. He had that question, and more than that, he wanted to know the answer, and no one had it. So he took off walking east, he said. He walked for days, he walked for months. He walked for years. He walked east from the time this question had come to him in his youth and kept on walking until he was a man in the middle of life. 17 years, he said, he walked east. I asked him what he had seen on this life walk. He told me of steppes that went on forever. There were mountains like those to the west of here, and some lakes bigger than any I've seen, little salt seas even. Their water was salt, he said, but mostly it was steppes. You know what that's like. The walking is good if it isn't too wet, and there are always animals to eat. So really, there was no impediment to him. Yet there he sat, across a fire from me, as far to the east as I had ever been, but it was only the Gate of Worlds, a nice broad pass between low mountains to north and south. It had taken him 12 years to walk back to where we were. This he told me. Finally, I had to ask him, why did you come back? Having gone so far, why turn around? Why not keep going for the rest of your life? He stared into the fire for a long time before he met my eye and answered me. When I was as far east as I got, he said, I came to a hill and went up it to look. I was feeling poorly and my feet hurt, and no person I had met for several years spoke any word I understood. All my dealings were done by sign, and you can do that and still get by, but after a while, you want a word with the people you see. I, Pippi, could only agree to that. And so, he said, he stood on that hill, and all to the east was just the same. There was no sign at all that it would ever change. I realized, he said, that this world is just too big. You can't have all of it, no matter how much you want it. It's bigger than any man can walk in one life. Possibly, it just keeps going on forever. Possibly our Mother Earth is round, he said then, like a pregnant woman or the moon, and if you walked long enough, you would come around to where you started, assuming the Great Salt Sea did not stop you. But really, there's no way to know for sure. And so I turned back, he said, because the world is too big, and most of all, I wanted to talk to somebody again before I died. Having said that, having told his tale, we stood and hugged, and he cried so hard I thought he would choke. I had to hold him up. Whether he had succeeded or failed in his life walk, he did not know, and I didn't either. After that, he calmed down, and we looked at the fire until long in the night, telling other stories we knew. Before bed, I asked him, so what's for you now? What will you do now that you're back? Well, he said, to tell the truth, I'm thinking I may head off east again.
I'll read a very short story and a couple more poems. And the story is She Unnames Them. I'm ending up with animals. And I don't quite know why, but I have a feeling that everything you've been doing here today has to do with the community of being on Earth, which isn't just human. Anyway, she unnames them. Most of them accepted namelessness with the perfect indifference with which they had so long accepted and ignored their names. Whales, dolphins, seals, and sea otters consented with particular grace and alacrity, sliding into anonymity as into their element. A faction of yaks, however, protested. They said that yak sounded right, and that almost everyone who knew they existed called them that. Unlike ubiquitous creatures such as rats or fleas who've been called by hundreds or thousands of different names since Babel, the yaks could truly say, they said, that they had a name. They discussed the matter all summer. The councils of the elderly females finally agreed that though the name might be useful to others, it was so redundant from the yak point of view that they never spoke it themselves, and hence might as well dispense with it. After they presented the argument in this light to their bulls, a full consensus was delayed only by the onset of severe early blizzards. Soon after the beginning of the thaw, their agreement was reached, and the designation, yak, was returned to the donor. Among the domestic animals, few horses had cared what anybody called them, since the failure of Dean Swift's attempt to name them from their own vocabulary. Cattle, sheep, swine, asses, mules, and goats, along with chickens, geese, and turkeys, all agreed enthusiastically to give their names back to the people to whom, as they put it, they belonged. A couple of problems did come up with pets. The cats, of course, steadfastly denied ever having had any name other than those self-given, unspoken, and ineffably personal names which, as the poet named Eliot said, they spend long hours daily contemplating. Though none of the contemplators has ever admitted that what they contemplate is their name, and some onlookers have wondered if the object of that meditative gaze might not in fact be the perfect or platonic mouse. In any case, it's a moot point now. It was with the dogs and some parrots, lovebirds, ravens, mynas that trouble arose. These verbally talented individuals insisted their names were important to them, and flatly refused to part with them. But as soon as they understood that the issue was precisely one of individual choice, and that anybody who wanted to be called Rover, or Frou-Frou, or Polly, or a birdie in the personal sense, was perfectly free to do so, not one of them had the least objection to parting with the generic appellations poodle, parrot, dog, bird, and all the Linnaean qualifiers that had trailed along behind him for 200 years like tin cans tied to a tail. The insects parted with their names in vast clouds and swarms of ephemeral syllables, buzzing and stinging and humming and flitting and crawling and tunneling away. As for the fish of the sea, their names dispersed from them in silence throughout the oceans, like faint, dark blurs of cuttlefish ink, and drifted off on the currents without a trace. None were left now to unname, and yet how close I felt to them when I saw one of them swim or fly or trot or crawl across my way or over my skin, or stalk me in the night, or go along beside me for a while in the day. They seemed far closer than when their names had stood between myself and them like a clear barrier. So close that my fear of them and their fear of me became one same fear. And the attraction that many of us felt, the desire to smell one another's smells, feel or rub or caress one another's scales or skin, or feathers or fur, taste one another's blood or flesh, keep one another warm. That attraction was now all one with the fear. The hunter could not be told from the hunted, nor the eater from the food. This was more or less the effect I'd been after. It was somewhat more powerful than I'd anticipated, but I couldn't now in all conscience make an exception for myself. I put anxiety away, went to Adam, and said, "You and your father lent me this, gave it to me. Actually, it's been really useful, but it doesn't seem exactly to fit very well lately, but thanks very much. It's really been very useful. It's hard to give back a gift without sounding peevish or ungrateful, and I didn't want to leave him with that impression." He wasn't paying much attention as it happened, and said only, "Put it down over there, okay," and went on with what he was doing. Now, one of my reasons for doing what I did was that talk was getting us nowhere. But all the same, I felt a little let down. I had been prepared to defend my decision, and I thought that perhaps when he did notice, he might be upset and want to talk. So I put some things away and fiddled around a little. He continued to do what he was doing and to take no notice of anything else. So at last I said, "Well, goodbye, dear. I hope the garden key turns up." He was fitting parts together and said without looking around, "Okay, fine, dear. When's dinner?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I'm going now with the..." I hesitated. "With them, you know." And I went on. In fact, I had only just then realized how hard it would have been to explain myself. I could not chatter away as I used to do, taking it all for granted. My words now must be as slow, as new, as single, as tentative as the steps I took going down the path away from the house, between the dark branch, tall dancers motionless against the winter shining. I wrote that story, most of it, on a cocktail napkin on an airplane, flying out of New York. Hallelujah. Okay, 3 poems. Futurology. I cannot break free from these iron stars. I want the raspberry paw pads of the fox, but here are only claws, the crab, the scorpion, great shining signs that slide across the sky. I want the wisdom ignorant of wars and the soft key that opens all the locks. I want the touch of fur, the slant of sun deep in a golden slotted changing eye. Oh, let there be no signs. Let fall the bars, and walls be moss-grown scattered rocks. Let all the evil we have done be done, and minds lie still as sunlit meadows lie. We were supposed to read you stories, and we've read you some stories, we've locked poems, but this is a poem called The Story. It's just part of a story, actually quite a lot of stories. The part where the third son, or the stepdaughter, sent on the impossible errand through the uncanny forest, comes across a fox with its paw caught in a trap, or little sparrows fallen from the nest, or some ants in trouble in a puddle of water. He frees the fox. She puts the fledglings in the nest. They get the ants safe to their anthill. The little fox will come back later and lead him to the castle where the princess is imprisoned. The sparrows will fly before her to where the golden egg is hidden. The ants will sort out every poppy seed for them from the heap of sand before the fatal morning. And I don't think I can add much to this story. All my life, it's been telling me, if I'll only listen, who the hero is and how to live happily ever after. And finally, I will read you a very old poem, one of the first poems I published, Tao Song. O slow fish, show me the way. O green weed, grow me the way. The way you go, the way you grow is the way indeed. O bright sun, light me the way, the right way, the one no one can say. If one can choose it, it is wrong. Sing me the way, O song. No one can lose it for long.